Can you all hear me pretty well? This guy over here, he's in charge. He's going to turn me up when necessary. Um, but what I'm going to do is give you a rapid fire tour, and I guess this is being videoed, so I'll try to stay still, but I usually don't like to do that. A rapid fire tour through things about diabetes. This is, I could give you an entire year course on this, but you're going to get it in like 17 minutes. Okay. So you'll be experts and you'll save a whole lot of time, right? So, thank you, by the way, for inviting me here. I was going to say, I actually did say to Ria, I said, oh, it's good to be back after a year. Well, then I realized, well, wait a minute, there was a pandemic in there. I forgot I lost 3 years of my life. Apparently, the last time we did this was probably 2019, maybe. Okay. So it's been quite some time. But it's good to be invited back. What are we going to talk about? Well, what are the different kinds of diabetes? How many people have diabetes, particularly in the US? I won't deal with the world right now. That's too big a problem for me. What are the symptoms of diabetes? How do I get diagnosed? Why are there so many people getting diabetes? And then what are the risks of having diabetes? And finally, after I completely depress you, I will talk to you briefly about what treatments are available and how that's pretty encouraging. In fact, you guys may know that this is the 100-year anniversary for the first person to ever receive insulin on January 22nd, 1922. So, types of diabetes. You guys have heard about this. Type 1 is generally called juvenile diabetes. It's for the diabetes we describe as being autoimmune, meaning your own body attacks your pancreas. It mostly presented in children, but we now know that it actually can present at almost any time in life. But the majority of patients present as children. It is much less common than type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes actually is much more inheritable. In fact, if your parent has diabetes, you've got about a 50-50 shot of getting it yourself, but it also depends on activity and behavior and eating. So 95% of our patients in this country are type 2, and that's what I will focus most of my comments on today. Gestational diabetes is becoming an epidemic. It used to be quite rare, less than 5% of pregnancies. It is now getting up to close to 10% of all US pregnancies struggle with abnormal glucose, which can significantly affect the pregnancy in terms of adverse outcomes, in terms of baby's weight, and it can also program the child while in utero to become diabetic, obese, and insulin resistant later in life. So, yes, your pregnancy is programming your child, not just your genetics. It's called epigenetics, and it is an in utero phenomenon, meaning in the uterus, in the womb. The last thing listed here is prediabetes. Prediabetes is a term we came up with to try and warn people like, it's coming, the car's on the way, you're on the train tracks, the train is coming, and you need to get out of the way. So we created a category so you could know, am I at risk until I walk in? I don't want to walk in and just find out I had diabetes when I could have known 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before that, that I could have done something to stop that. So what are the facts right now about how many people have diabetes in this country? 37.3 million is the latest statistic from 2021. That's 11.3% of the US. That's 1 out of 10 people. Now you can just look around you and think about, okay, that means 1 out of 10 people in this room probably have diabetes. And 1 out of 10 people that you see in Walmart or wherever, these people are struggling with diabetes. Actually, I think people in Walmart may have higher risk of diabetes, but that's because of their shopping. 8.5 million people undiagnosed. That means a lot of people walking around, they don't quite know it yet until they walk into a hospital because they don't like to go to doctors. I don't like going to doctors either. And then they finally find out, oh, wow, my blood sugar's that high. I had no idea. Then prediabetes. So if we look at how many people are at risk for diabetes, this is 96 million. So that's 38% of our population are on the road to diabetes. And if you add those two numbers together, you get 133 million people. Now, I'm sure that you all go and Google how many people there are in the United States every day, but I did. And there's 332 million people in this country. And if 133 million of them have high blood sugar, and then we take away the children, that's almost half of all adults have a blood sugar that's not quite normal. And this has not happened overnight. At the bottom, you can't really read this, but it says 1 out of 3 people will develop diabetes in their lifetime. So look to your left, look to your right, and it's either you, the person on your left, or the person on your right is going to have diabetes, okay, in their lifetime. That's how common this is. So what are the symptoms? Well, I kind of like this cartoon because it's not just a dry list of things, but always tired. That's 99% of the people that come to see me, by the way. You're not alone. Frequent urination, that's probably one of the most common things when the blood sugar is very high, because you got to get rid of the glucose, and the way we do it is to pee it out. Sudden weight loss, wounds that won't heal, always hungry. Sexual problems, this is mostly men who have difficulty with erections, obviously. Blurry vision, vaginal infections, particularly yeast infections, numb or tingling in the hands or feet, mostly in the feet. The hands are less common. That's usually carpal tunnel. And then always thirsty. So I think that's a really good cartoon example of how you can look for what might be a sign. How do you find out if you have diabetes? It's very, very easy. In fact, apparently you can do it today. I was unaware that was going to happen. But the best test is called the hemoglobin A1C test. And this is now a verified test across the entire country, where you can look at your number and know that that number is really where you are and where your blood sugar has been for the last 3 months. It's like your batting average for those of you watching the World Series. This tells you, how's my blood sugar been doing for the last 3 months? Okay. We call it the A1C in the clinic, and the cash price from a doctor, when we draw it, is about $28. If somebody comes in and doesn't have insurance, that's about the price they would pay. Now, unfortunately, you still got to, pay everything else. But the bottom line is, if you could just go in and get an A1C, it'd be about $28. Normal is less than 5.8. Prediabetes is 5.9 to 6.4, and diabetes is over 6.5. On the right here's an example of an over-the-counter kit that you can actually buy on Amazon. That's where I pulled this picture off. It was about $60, and there's about 4 possible kits in there. So you can test at home. You don't even have to go to the doctor. You can go to Walgreens and find out whether you have diabetes today, okay? Why are we all getting diabetes? Well, I think you probably have an idea of what I'm going to talk about next. We have evolved in a different environment than we are living in today. If you think about 3,000 years ago, we did not have a McDonald's on every corner. And so we have easy access to food, in particular, as we were discussing earlier with Dr. Gupta, instant gratification for anything that we might want. In fact, I don't think, how could we get you here today without providing lunch for you? You got to have something. We all love to eat. It's a social construct. It makes us feel better. It makes us get together with other people. There's a lot of reasons why this is somewhat addictive. So, is it cookies, cake, candy, pie, and donuts that is causing diabetes? Well, most of you know that we're not supposed to eat a lot of that stuff. I don't think if you walked out of here and I'd never said anything about it, you'd kind of know those would be the bad foods, right? But what most people don't know about is these foods. Bread. We love bread. Bread is actually one of the highest carbohydrate foods and gets transmitted to sugar. So does pasta, potatoes, rice, and the worst food ever in the world for patients with diabetes or for patients trying to avoid diabetes is pizza. Okay? So, sorry to depress you. So let me depress you a little bit more. Let's look at the incidence of diabetes in our country over the last several years. It actually goes back almost 35 years. Well, this one goes back about 25. So this is 1985. In white states, we didn't have any data. In the light blue, less than 10%, and the dark blue, 10 to 14% of patients were obese. Okay? That was defined as a BMI greater than 30. I'm not going to go into that. Trust me, it's a pretty good measure of whether or not you are heavier than you need to be. So if we go forward year by year, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90. Now we added another color, 15 to 19%. Now we added another color, greater than 20%. We're up to 2001. We added another color, red. Now we had to add even another color, greater than 30% obese. And you can see that it keeps on going. Okay? So that's what's happened to us since 1985. We can't keep this up. Okay? This is why we have an epidemic of diabetes, because this is what's happening in terms of our weight as a country. So does obesity mean more diabetes? Just because you're heavy or large or larger than you need to be, does that mean you're sweet? Well, this was actually a study where they looked at people, whether their weight, what their weight was and what their diagnosis was. And you can see that if you're heavier, you're more blue. If you have diabetes, you're more red. So if you have both, you're purple. So this is 2004, 2009, 2014, 2019. You can't really see the colors here because of the lights, but there's a lot of purple there, meaning people are both heavy and have diabetes. So it's all part of the same animal. The animal is insulin resistance, okay? So insulin resistance is the main defect in type 2 diabetes. It's rising epidemically in the United States because we're getting heavier, because of the high carbohydrate diet that we have. And it's recognizable, but often overlooked. In fact, I'm going to teach you how to sit here or anywhere in church and decide whether or not the lady in front of you has diabetes. That's pretty creepy, isn't it? All right. Insulin resistance can appear right under your nose. Well, that's one way. All right. But genetics, obesity, aging, medications, and there's some rare disorders, but these add up to insulin resistance, which then leads to diabetes. This is insulin, of course, the hormone that you all make whenever you eat food. You're supposed to make it, but heavier we get, the older we get, the less active we get, the more insulin we need to make in order to dispose of our sugar into our muscles and our fat cells. So these are things that might be clues that you have insulin resistance. One, if you have obesity or just excess body fat, and usually it's in the central portion. Men tend to carry their fat a little bit more in the belly. Women tend to carry it more in the hips. But bottom line is the abdomen is where you get the metabolic fat tissue. If you ever get a lipid profile and somebody tells you your triglycerides are high and your HDL, this is a good cholesterol, is low, that's another wonderful pattern that tells you, wow, I must have insulin resistance, even though that's not what the doctor said. If you're African American, Hispanic, or Native American, you are much higher risk. Those of you who are familiar with the term polycystic ovarian syndrome, this is another classic form. This is basically insulin resistance in women. The counterpoint in men, you may say, well, men can't get polycystic ovarian syndrome because they don't have ovaries. Well, if you're kind of heavy set and bald, that's the male equivalent of polycystic ovarian syndrome in men, in women. Last thing here is acanthosis nigricans. So acanthosis nigricans is a skin change that is very common, and this is how you can find out whether the lady in church has diabetes. You may be able to see here, there's a very velvety little skin rash here, and there's skin tags here, which are classic, okay? And then you can see it here again, skin tags, and then this velvety dark neck rash. A lot of people are scrubbing their neck thinking that it's just dirty. In fact, this used to be called dirty neck syndrome, believe it or not, because people didn't know, why is my skin getting so dark right in the creases? And then there's another picture of it. It almost looks like you could cut it with a butter knife. And then this is in a male. You can't see it quite as well, but it's more subtle, but the subtle pictures aren't going to show up as well here. I tried to change the lighting, but you can see skin tags are often associated with it, but not always. That's another different lighting on that picture. This is in a Caucasian person. It's very subtle here, just a very tan, but little white creases inside the tan, and then skin tags. And then that's a close-up of that. And then here's a male who it really looks like he just needs to wash, right? You might look at him and go, dude, you need a shower. This is actually a metabolic change in his skin related to high insulin levels. That's a close-up of that. That's a closer up. You can see there's lots of skin tags mixed in here, right? And then it's even on his forehead, which is very rare. That's why I took this picture, but that's not common. And then there's his neck again. A close-up again looks like you need a butter knife to look at that. So that's how you can diagnose it in church. Now, what are the complications of diabetes? You can't really see here, but these big vessels are supposed to be in the back of your eye. This is a picture of the back of your eyeball. But these little tiny spider vessels in here, they're not supposed to be there. They are growing to help repair little tiny amounts of damage due to high blood sugar. And then what happens is they burst and they bleed, and then the eye fills with blood, and you go in and you go, oh, I can't see out of that eye. And that's how you find out, I didn't know I had abnormal snake-like blood vessels growing in my eyeball. That's called proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And when you bleed into it, it's called a vitreous hemorrhage or bleeding into the eye, often the presenting symptom. Kidney failure and dialysis, these are just people on dialysis, not what you want. This is the number one cause of blindness, number one cause of kidney failure, and the number one cause of amputation. Now, mostly it's preceded by foot ulcers, people who don't have good feeling in their feet, people who don't have good blood flow in their feet, and then eventually that leads very quickly to bad things. If you're a diabetic and you have a blister or a cut or an ulcer on your foot, it may take less than 1 week for you to possibly require an amputation if you do not get seen and get on an antibiotic very quickly. That's how fast amputation can occur with somebody with poor feeling and poor blood flow. The last thing here is that 80% of people with diabetes die of vascular death. So they're going to die of what's called atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. This is a fancy term for heart attacks and strokes and sudden death. 14.6 years earlier than most people, so they die earlier. And then it's the number one cause of death and disability in diabetes. So it's not just that it causes misery, it takes you out early. So what's the good news after all that? The good news is that we have evolved tremendously. When I started treating diabetes, I only had insulin and sulfonylurea. That's an oral class of drugs, which we'll get to in a second. But this is the 100-year anniversary of the discovery of insulin. These are the two guys that discovered it. Charles Banting was a medical student, and Charles Best was a medical student. Frederick Banting was actually an orthopedic surgeon, and this dog was the first dog that they were able to treat with insulin. And Banting made it on the cover of Time magazine, but Best was left off, and he was a little resentful about that later. This was the first child. His name was Leonard Thompson. You can see him here wasting away, unable to control his blood sugar or keep any blood sugar in his body because it was just all going out in his urine. And after being on insulin for a very short time, look how plump and happy and healthy he looks. And this is him around in his 20s. He unfortunately died of complications of diabetes at age 27. But he was age 13 in this picture. 13. Okay. This is another woman you can see almost looks like she's emaciated here. And then within 4 months of insulin therapy, how much she's able to suddenly hang on to calories and do better. So we've also gone from vials and syringes to insulin pens, which are so much more convenient for our patients. We've also shortened and made the needles much more sharp and tiny. So this is literally only 4 millimeters long. It's barely felt by most patients, including children who inject themselves up to 4 times a day. This is an insulin pump back in the 60s, and you can see that it required a backpack. We now have insulin pumps that you can actually wear as a sticker on your belly, and we also have sensors that can monitor your blood sugar 24/7. When I started, these are the two classes of drugs. We had pills and we had insulin. 2 classes of drugs. Move forward 5 years, we only had 3. We added metformin, which, by the way, had been available in Europe since 1975, but wasn't approved in this country. Now, 2005, look at our list. I'm not going to go over this, but there's now 9 classes of drugs when you move forward 10 years. And now we're going to move forward 17 years to today. And this is our list of drugs for diabetes. There are now 13 classes of drugs that are used to treat type 2 diabetes. And pretty amazing. We have multiple options, and you can see how it's very difficult for the average primary care doctor to wrap their hands around this and choose what's the best for my particular patient. So if you look at the last slide here, it will show you that we really only use about 8 of these classes now, and some of them are quite remarkable because they not only will lower your blood sugar, they will not cause hypoglycemia, which occurs with insulin. They will not cause weight gain. In fact, they cause significant weight loss, up to 15 to 25 pounds of weight loss, and they decrease the risk of heart attacks, strokes, death, admission to the hospital for heart failure, and progression to kidney failure. That's how far we've come. So that's a pretty big deal to me. And I will stop there, and I will concede the podium to Dr. Gupta, and I'm sure that you have a wonderful introduction for her as well. Thank you very much for having me here to speak with you all today.
Thank you, Ria, and thanks to DMKF Foundation for the opportunity to spread the message of life, technology, balance. Today, I'm going to talk about wireless mobile device addiction and how it relates to diabetes. Wireless mobile device. So, what does a wireless mobile device mean? I don't call them smartphones. I call them wireless mobile devices. I think we give them way too much respect by calling them smart. We've got to put them back in their place and call them what they are, WMDs. So, a WMD is any device that is mobile or is portable and uses wireless network or internet to send or receive data. So, WMD would include our smartphones, smart tablets, iWatches, laptops, video games, and for completion's sake, modern TV as well, because modern TV operates more of internet than the good old fashioned cable. So before I lay out the learning objectives for my talk, I want to take a moment for reflection. I encourage everyone to sit back, relax, and reflect. Here is something I would like you all to ask yourself. As I hear this talk, am I planning to multitask? Am I planning to check my email? Am I planning to check my social media? Am I planning to reply to some text messages? Or am I just going to pay my full undivided attention for the next 25 minutes? Am I truly multitasking? Or am I just switching from one task to the other and not giving my full attention to either task? Do I ever allow myself permission to just do one task at a time? Is my brain even wired to do two things at the same time? Think about it. So, what are we going to learn about today? 3 questions about wireless mobile device addiction. Why, how, and what? Why are wireless mobile devices addictive? What is it about our devices that we find it hard to not reach for them every 90 seconds? How does that behavior affect our health in general and might lead to diabetes in particular? What can be done about it? How do we achieve life technology balance without needing to throw our smartphones out the window? Why does it matter to me? I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. Why does wireless mobile device addiction or life technology matter to me? Let me share a story with you. My story, the story of my journey in medicine. We are going to travel back in time 20 years, July 1, 2002. I was a bright eyed first year medical student in New Delhi, India. 8 years later, I was a pediatric resident at Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit, and then a pediatric endocrinology fellow at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. After 16 years of rigorous medical training that spanned over 2 different continents, I signed my dream job as a pediatric endocrinologist at Vanderbilt University Children's Hospital in Nashville. That brought me to Tennessee from Minnesota. That was about 4 years ago. Earlier this year, in February of 2022, I resigned from my dream job and I launched 2 missions. Number 1, CAP Pediatric Endocrinology, my solo pediatric endocrinology private practice in Franklin, Tennessee. And number 2, Freedom, Ungrip Devices, Grip Life. Freedom is an educational platform that is designed to raise awareness about life technology balance. Over the last few years of being a pediatric endocrinologist, I realized that the majority of the conditions that I was seeing in my clinic had nothing to do with endocrine. The children that I was treating, everything was okay with their hormones. It wasn't really about endocrine, it was about lifestyle. Lifestyle that was rooted in part secondary to excessive screen time by children and by their parents. I'll give you a few examples of some real life patients that I saw. I saw a 5-year-old boy, Tyler, for obesity. Tyler weighed 95 pounds at 5 years of age. I checked all of his hormone levels. Everything came back normal. Poor Tyler was so obese that simply the effort of walking from the waiting room to the exam room made him short of breath at 5 years of age. Sophie, 7-year-old little Sophie, I diagnosed her with type 2 diabetes, which we all now know is typically a disease of the adulthood. And then having a conversation with little Sophie's parents that Sophie's risk for heart disease has increased significantly because of her early diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. 11-year-old Jose with poorly controlled type 1 diabetes because he's up at night until 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. doing what? I asked him, what do you do until 1 a.m.? I watch YouTube and TikTok videos. His circadian rhythm is all messed up. While he's up at night, he's eating snacks and not taking insulin for those snacks because his parents are not always there to supervise him. 17-year-old Riley. I diagnosed her with a bed sore, a 6-inch deep bed sore. She has type 1 diabetes. Why does a 17-year-old, otherwise healthy young lady have bed sore? Her addiction to video games. And the fact that she is sedentary in her bed pretty much all evening and night after she's home from school playing video games. That made me take a pause. That made me realize that there is something different I need to do for my patients. That made me think that we as a society, have we come to a point of no return where it's okay for us to be engaged with our devices during meal times? We don't think twice about it. Where it's okay for us to check Snapchat while driving, endangering our own life and that of somebody else on the road? Where it's okay for us to pour our personal details and emotions on social media and associate our sense of self-esteem based on how many people like our post, comment on our post, and follow us on social media? That's the new standard we hold each other accountable to. Where we spend endless hours in the toilet, doom scrolling the internet, hardly realizing that sitting in that posture for that long can actually cause hemorrhoids. Where we let our time, attention, and sleep be auctioned behind our backs for a very high price. Where a 17-year-old boy killed himself after being scammed by a sextortionist online. None of this seems okay. None of this seems normal or the new normal. And my friends, I'm here to change the status quo. Why else might wireless mobile device addiction matter? Why else might life technology balance matter? There is now more and more research that indicates increasing prevalence of screen time related disorders such as type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, and obesity. We saw a lot of data earlier. A recent study was also published in NEJM that projected that by year 2030, so in only 8 years from now, 50% of the adults in the US will have obesity, and 25% will have severe obesity in only 8 years from now. Now, is the entire obesity epidemic related to screen time? Maybe not. There are a lot of other factors, but screen time plays a big role. The sedentary behavior, the food marketing that we are exposed to through everything that we access on the internet, and the fact that our brain does not register satiety when we are snacking while we are watching something. We do not have that sense of fullness. Those are some of the reasons why screen time, excessive screen time, might be responsible for the obesity epidemic. So let's try and tackle question number 1. Why are wireless mobile devices addictive to the point where we find it really hard to not reach for them every 2 to 3 minutes? Pavlov was a scientist back in the 1800s. He did experiments with dogs. He was able to condition the brain of his dog to salivate in response to the sound of a bell. Even when there was no food, he would ring the bell, the dog would salivate. He had conditioned the brain of the dog to do that behavior. I sometimes think if in the 21st century we are somehow a part of Pavlov's experiment where every time our device dings, we're like, what am I going to get next? What did I get next? What did I get next? Did somebody like my post? Did somebody comment? Do I have a new email? Do I have a new text? Our interaction with our devices is very similar to what is described in the science of psychology as behavior addiction. What is behavior addiction? Behavior addiction is unsuccessful attempts to control a behavior. Unsuccessful attempts to control a behavior. One example of this might be we open our TikTok app just to check what's going on for 15 minutes. And then 2 hours later, we are still checking. Unsuccessful attempts to control the behavior. And the bottom line of all of these behaviors lies a neurotransmitter or a hormone called dopamine. Dopamine is the anticipation hormone. Our brain releases dopamine in anticipation of anything that we perceive as a reward. Think sugar, salt, spice, fat. Our brain releases dopamine because we anticipate pleasure. How does that apply to the world of wireless mobile devices? Dopamine sends us down the trigger loop of wireless mobile devices, the trigger loop. The step 1 of trigger loop is cue. Every time there is a ding, a buzz, a chime on our device, the dopamine in our brain shoots up, causes an intense craving to check. We have to check. And then, like Pavlov's dog, our mind has become so conditioned that our subconscious response is to reach for the device. We don't even think twice about it. We reach for the device and we find our reward in our device. We feel satisfied at relieving the craving. What is that reward? A new email. Somebody said, "Oh, you look so pretty" on social media. We feel validated. We want to go back for more. How many people liked my post versus somebody else's post? She's more popular than I am. Every time there is a reward, we are looking for the next cue. Every time there is a cue, we are looking for the next reward. And we find ourselves wrapped in this trigger loop of wireless mobile devices. Now, things have gotten to this point where even if there is no notification on our device, we still want to check every few minutes just in case we missed something, just in case the internet wasn't working. And we refresh our screen and we refresh our screen until we find something. And then our brain tells us, see, there was a reward waiting for you. You should have checked 5 minutes sooner. The trigger loop of wireless mobile devices. Question number 2. How does this behavior affect our health? And like I said earlier, health and well-being in general, and diabetes in particular, what has it got to do with it? The easiest way to understand that is by understanding the escape displace hypothesis of wireless mobile devices. The escape displace hypothesis of wireless mobile devices. What does that mean? Let's imagine that the 24 hours in a day are represented by a bucket. What are some of the common things or activities that we do to fill those 24 hours? Okay, commonly we put in sleep for about 7 to 8 hours. work or school for about 7 to 9 hours. Meals, cooking meals, eating meals, cleaning up after meals, about 2 hours. Fitness, recommendation is to spend at least 60 minutes for physical activity every day. Household chores, 1 to 2 hours. Hobby, if we still have one, for 1 hour. Driving to work, from work, socializing, 1 hour. That's it. That's 24 hours. An average American spends about 3 hours on their devices outside of school and office work. Now imagine what happens to that bucket if we put in 3 hours of screen time. The day doesn't become 27 hours long, but something from the bucket leaks. What leaks? Physical activity, sleep, family time, work, learning. Depending on what it is that leaks from our bucket, that will determine our health and well-being. The escape displays hypothesis of wireless mobile devices. What makes us escape? What makes us reach for our devices? Boredom. We don't like being bored. We come to a stop at the traffic light. We must check something. Stop sign, we are doing mental math. Okay, I'm the fourth person to reach the stop sign. There are 3 other people who need to go before me. That gives me about 20 seconds to check whatever it is that I need to check. We are bored. It's okay to be bored. We have to let our mind be free. Boredom leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to innovation. It's okay to be bored. We escape from stress, conflict with a loved one, conflict with a colleague. We escape from anxiety, poor scores in school. We don't want to deal with it. We want to escape from it, and we want to outsource our coping strategies to the virtual world. I'll deal with it later. Let me just check what's going on the internet. What are some of the activities that we have displaced? We displace exercise. We tend to displace cooking because it's so much easier to order on Uber Eats. We displace sleep. It's really hard not to watch just one more episode of Netflix. And before we realize, it's 1 a.m. And then we make a promise to ourselves that we are not going to do this tomorrow. But then you know how that goes, right? We are so distracted at work, it takes us longer to do the same amount of work. For students, we displace learning. There is so much distraction. We displace family time, screen-free family time with undivided attention that builds a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. We displace focused driving. Now, this is something that I want to ask you. I have a blank space here on my slide. What are some of the outcomes of escape displace hypothesis? What do you think might happen if we keep displacing exercise in our routine? Anyone? Say that again. Obesity, yes, absolutely, obesity. And if we displace cooking, obesity, what happens if we don't get the required amount of sleep? What might happen the next day? Say that again. Irritability, tiredness, fatigue. And when we don't sleep properly the previous night, believe it or not, we are more hungry the next day. When we are stressed, our body is making cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It makes us hungry. So can you imagine, by sleeping well, you might actually lose weight? Okay. What else might be the outcome? Disease, mental health disease, and physical disease, diabetes, prediabetes, obesity, heart disease, anxiety, depression, suicide. The incidence of all of these have increased tremendously in the last 10 years, and social media and internet has a big role to play in that. Life dissatisfaction. We compare our life with everybody else's life on social media and feel bad about ourselves. Burnout. Upward social comparison. What is upward social comparison? Upward social comparison is comparing ourselves with everybody else on social media. Their perfect life, their perfect vacation, their perfect makeup, their perfect bodies, their perfect children, and how our own achievements feel so small compared to everybody else. And if we displace focused driving, death and accident might happen, might be an outcome. Last question. What do we do about it? Should we throw our smartphones out the window and go back to using a flip phone? Some people think that's the way to do it. But what I advocate for is balance. Life, technology, balance. But what does balance mean? What is balance? Balance is finding time for things that we need to do and things that we want to do. And for everybody here, what they need to do and what they want to do might be completely different. What are some of the needs? Work and school, exercise, sleep, eat healthy. What are some of the wants? Doom scroll the internet for 3 hours every day. As long as we are able to find the balance between our needs and wants, we might be okay with keeping our smartphones and not going back to flip phones. I'll give you 2 tools today for life technology balance. And if you want to write those down, tool number 1 is convert the conditioning of the brain from escape displace to engage replace. What does that mean? We talked about the theory of escape displace. How do we change that to engage replace? The next time there is this irrational, irresistible urge to reach for our device, I encourage you to pause. Pause for a microsecond and think, what is it that I'm reaching for my device for? Do I need to do a task with the help of my device? Or am I using it as a distraction? Am I using it as a 24/7 source of entertainment? Am I escaping from something? Am I escaping from a boring situation? And if yes, first of all, rid yourself of judgment. Let go of the guilt. No one is alone. We are all struggling with this. Put that device back down and then turn your attention and engage with whatever it was that you were escaping from and actively engage with that task or that person. So convert the theory of escape to engage. The activities that we have displaced from our lifestyle, let's replace them back. Exercise, sleep, family time, undivided attention to our work and academics. Let's replace them back in our life. My favorite example is that of a butter knife. We use a butter knife to spread butter, and then we put the butter knife back in its place. We don't walk around the house with a butter knife, do we? We don't. It would be weird because we treat the butter knife as a tool that is designed to accomplish a task. We are done with the task and we're done with it. How about we start treating our devices like a butter knife, like a tool? We pick it up to accomplish a task and then we put it back down and we move on. Think of a butter knife the next time you want to reach for your device as a distraction, okay? My patients are children. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. Their parents often ask me how much screen time is okay for a child. The first thing that amuses me is they never ask me how much screen time is okay for them. How much screen time is okay for an adult, as if adults have a free pass when it comes to screen time. It's only about children. Then I tell them the issue is not how much time your child or you are spending on the screen. The issue is what else should be happening during that time. What else could be happening during that time? What are the possibilities when we are sitting on our devices 3 hours every day, doom scrolling the internet? Tool number 2, break the trigger loop. We talked about the trigger loop of wireless mobile devices, which begins with a cue, leads to craving, which is dopamine mediated, makes us reach for our device, gives us a reward. How do we break the trigger loop? There are 4 steps. Step number 1, delete the cue. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these on how to do it. Step number 2, curb the craving, the dopamine mediated craving. That's hard. Number 3, weaken the response. This one is the easiest. Number 4, dull the reward. How do we do it? Delete the cue. Step number 1 to deleting the queue is by turning off non-essential notifications on the devices. That itself is a 3-hour workshop. I encourage you to familiarize yourself with the settings on your phone and turn off non-essential notifications so that when you wake up in the morning, your device screen, home screen, does not look like this, with so many red badges vying for your attention, just waiting for you to click to make the red badges go away. Instead, it looks like this. You have your attention. You've got to keep your attention. Your attention is being sold for a very high price, and you don't even know about it, and your time. So turn off non-essential notifications. Step number 2, wear a wristwatch. And if your wristwatch tells you the date, that's bonus 5 stars. Why is that important? Before I started wearing a wristwatch, I would reach for my device about 20 times a day just to see what time it is. And then invariably, I will find notifications. And then 25 minutes later, after I have answered all the notifications, I forgot. Why did I pick up my phone in the first place? Why did I need to check the time? You will reconnect with efficiency. You will reconnect with productivity, health, and joy just by wearing a wristwatch and by using an alarm clock. So that your device is not the first thing you check in the morning or touch in the morning, and your device is not the last thing you touch before you go to bed. Take the first 30 minutes in the morning as your personal private space. Do not let the outside world come rushing in first thing in the morning. Twitter can wait, TikTok can wait, YouTube can wait, emails can wait. 30 minutes, that's all you are asking for. Just 30 minutes to yourself. Take a few big deep breaths. Make that cup of coffee. Enjoy it. Be present with your coffee. Get dressed for office. Imagine what a wonderful day you're going to have, what you're going to be grateful for, who you are going to hug today, before you let the outside world come rushing into your personal, private space. Step number 2, curb the craving. We talked about this. Converting escape displays to engage replace. Every time there is the urge to reach for the device, pause and think. Be mindful of why we are using our device in that moment. Ease into the craving without judgment, without guilt. Put it back down and engage with real life. Weaken the response. This is really important to increase productivity and efficiency, making the devices harder to reach when we need to accomplish a task without distraction, especially at work. Place the devices in a desk drawer to begin with, 15 minutes interval. And if you're able to conquer the urge for 15 minutes, increase that to 30 minutes and then 60 minutes. I think we should be able to work without distraction for at least 60 minutes. We should be able to exercise without distraction for 60 minutes. If there is no desk drawer available, then placing the device in a bag's zipper pocket, zip it up and forget about it. Last step, dull the reward. Tough one. First one, delete social media applications. The applications are designed to be addictive. Now, I'm not advocating to delete your social media accounts. It's okay to have social media accounts. I use them myself. But the apps are time consuming. I encourage you to try this for 2 weeks. Delete the apps and use social media through a browser. So open Safari or Internet Explorer or whichever browser, type in facebook.com, type in your username and password if you remember the password. If you don't remember the password, well, then it's not even worth it. How many times are we likely to do it? Versus the app is so easily available, we click and we are right there in the virtual world. We have to increase the hurdles before we get to anything that is time consuming. So deleting social media apps, feeling pride in completing a task without interruption, and congratulating yourself on your efforts to curb wireless mobile device craving. I would summarize these with 3 key points. Life technology balance is possible. It is possible. Trust me, it is possible. It needs environmental changes or changes in the settings of your phone more than motivation. Abstinence from all wireless mobile devices is impossible, but moderation, balance, and real life engagement are definitely possible. For more resources on how to achieve life technology balance, please feel free to visit our website, freedom.net. We have lots of podcasts, blogs, research articles that might help you take the path and the first step towards life technology balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria, for the invitation. It was a pleasure for me to be here to share some of our work, but also to have some discussions because like earlier I was talking to her about the fact that my work really was founded on the self-determinations. I believe that everybody has the ability to achieve whatever they want, so long as the tools and their destiny is there. So today what I want to do is really talk about how diabetes have impacted our communities. And then we're going to end up on a good note, have some motivation thought as you live here to work on. And I just want to start by asking, I'm sure how many of you have really had either you don't have to volunteer if you don't want to, you or your family member, your colleague, your friend have diabetes. So diabetes is common. It's common. Now, my next question is that when you hear about diabetes, what comes to mind? Sick. Okay. What else? Sugar. Say that again. Amputation. So you can see that there's always some worries that comes with it. Diabetes is a very complex disease. As Dr. Gray mentioned, we have made a lot of progress in terms of the treatment. And we have behavior, as Dr. Gupta also mentioned, behavior that really put ourselves into difficult situations. So I want to really start by follow up with what, or add a little bit to whatever Dr. Gray said. And I want to say that in the context of the Black community or the minority community in general. So as you know, we have about 37 million by the CDC data, million Americans that have diabetes of all ages, which is really about, like Dr. Gray said, 1 in 10 people. Now, in terms of the context of if you move to the state, the same pattern exists. In Tennessee, for example, more than 700,000 people have diabetes. And the diabetes, the new case for the United States is about 1.4 million a year. In Tennessee, it's about 40,000 people a year. So it is common, and the concern is that there are behavior that really can aid, but we need to reach out to our community to really work with this community to really address the issue. Now, if you look at the prevalence, one of the other major concern is that it affects disproportionately the minority community. So if you look at the data, you have, if you compare the American, Indian, Alaska Native, non-Hispanic Black, Hispanic, and then the non-white, you can see that the minority community has a skew that carries the highest burden of diabetes in terms of the diagnosis. And specifically, Black population, non-Hispanic Black, has almost two times the prevalence when you compare to the white. And this is really concerning because the consequence of diabetes in itself, it is a risk for a lot of complications, other diseases that comes along with it, but also the death rate. And I know that there are a number of community leaders that really have taken up on that to really address the issue in the community. That's why I've been working with church leaders in terms of really trying to assess the need and work with the community to address those barriers. So with that disproportionate burden that is in the minority population, you can also see that in terms of the risk for other disease, it's an issue. It is a major concern. We know that diabetes, when you compare individuals that have diabetes and those that don't have diabetes, the risk for heart disease, the risk for vision, blindness, the risk for kidney disease, the long-term risk for amputation of the lower limb, all of those increase enormously. Diabetes today is the number 7 leading cause of death in the United States. Yes, it is number 7. Heart disease is number 1. After that, you have cancer, you have COVID-19. But although it is the number 7 leading cause of death, it is a major risk factor for heart disease. And if you look, 30% of Black are more likely to die from heart disease when you compare them to the non-Hispanic white. Moreover, they have 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with kidney disease and 2 times more likely to have amputation. Okay, so in the proportion, like I mentioned, the disproportionate impact of diabetes in our community also have a huge impact in the health outcome. And that really comes with the quality of life for the individual, for the family. I'm sure that if a relative, a family member has diabetes, there's a need that it impacts the family because everybody wants to help. Depending on the level, if it is a father, then it affects the income for the family. If it is the mother, then it affects other aspects of the family. So really, it really have an impact on the family from generation after generation. Now, the other thing that I would like to mention in terms of the impact on the community is the cost. Caring for diabetes is expensive. If you take the diabetes case aside, some of those don't have diabetes. We have our annual visit. If you only have blood pressure, you have those things to take care of. But when you have diabetes, the care for diabetes is complex. Now, I think that sometimes when patients are given or individuals are being told, okay, here's the list of things you need to do with diabetes, the reason why I ask what comes to mind is because when diabetes, sometimes people are diagnosed or have a family member be diagnosed with diabetes, the care is a burden. The cost comes and added to it as well. So if you look at the cost as of now, the CDC have estimated that diabetes cost is about $327 billion a year. It has been an increase of 26% over a 5-year period. Okay. Now, if you break it down slowly, you can see that since the burden again is on the minority community, 36% of the minority community have less doctor appointment, fewer doctor appointment. And what is the reason for that? Because they're most likely uninsured. And that reduction in the doctor visit reflects the increase in the emergency room visits. Okay. As a consequence, there's also a high cost out of pocket. And this is really a comparison among, if you want the Black, the non-Hispanic Black versus the non-Hispanic white. So if you want to break down furthermore of the cost, taking care for diabetes, you have several aspects. This is the really data from the GoodRx. And I want to focus first on the yellow section, the yellow circle. This is really a case where you have a patient that have insulin and it's really controlling the diabetes. The total out of cost really amount to about 5,000 a year. This is with insurance, but this is out of pocket. And as you can see, the cost can be distributed among the doctor visit, the medication that have been prescribed, the over-the-counter medications they supply. The funny thing I noticed about diabetic care is that the glucometer, the machine for checking your blood sugar, is less than $1 usually. Very cheap, but the strip. And I compare that usually with the printer. When you go buy a printer, usually they give you a printer for a lower price, but buying the tone really takes really a lot of money out of it. So if you look at the distribution overall, the doctor visit account for the cost, the medication that have been prescribed, the over-the-counter supply, but also there's loss of wage. Because people really have diabetes tend to sometimes they don't go to work because they feel sick. So they take off from work really increases as the comorbidity, the complication of diabetes increases. Now, this is for someone who is using insulin and is insured. Now, if someone doesn't have insurance, the ER visit will increase, like I mentioned on the previous slide. So it will also add about 1,000 costs annually. When you have chronic disease like blood pressure medication, right? Heart disease, cholesterol medications, those also will add to the cost, the out-of-pocket of the patient. When an individual don't have insurance, there's more than 1,000 added to the cost as well. So let's really move back and stand back and see. So you have the burden that affect the community of the minority community in a great deal compared to the non-Hispanic white. With that burden comes the mental, physical tax or pain, but also you add the cost, right? So I've been working with community just not to tell them, here's a problem, but rather understand what is the challenge on their side and how collectively we can partner to reach the solution that can best serve the community. So today, as you know, there are many programs available to address or provide support to community in terms of addressing diabetes care. One thing that I would like also to really share with you is that when you think about diabetes, you think about health issue. How am I going to do this to care for my family? How am I going to manage my health? How am I going to maintain my work over time? But in diabetes, I see something else. Diabetes has several letters: D, I, A, B, E, T, E, and S. In each of those letters, I see something else. For D, I see determination. We all can be determined to really battle that disease. The battle is not lost. We can be inspired by our value to tackle the issue. A, achievement is possible. Yes, there are complications. Yes, there are a lot of tasks to carry. Yet there are need to really not allow ourselves to satisfy our desire like Dr. Gupta said. But the achievement is possible. Believing. We all had planned every day we get up. We all have planned as the New Year's when the New Year starts. But we also, as a human, we get off our plan from time to time. But we have to keep believing in yourself that we can do better the next day. E, encouragement. We have to encourage ourselves, our family members, be supportive of them during that journey. Trying. If we try every day, eventually we're going to get there. E is empowerment. Like I mentioned, my work was based on self-determination. I believe that once we empower community, members of the community, members of the family, they can achieve the goal they set to achieve. And S, success. Okay. Diabetes is a complex disease, yes. Excuse me. E, encouragement. No problem. I know diabetes is a complex disease. Even if you think about it, there are 7 self-care behaviors, right? 1 is being active. 2, eat healthy. 3, keep up with the doctor visit. 4, be adherent to your medication. 5, help and coping skill, be able to cope, use positive approach to cope with stress situation. 6, rest, avoid or limit the need for being depressed and so forth. And 7 is what? Support. Okay. So when you go and they list all of those 7 behavior, it is scary, especially if you just get diagnosed with diabetes. Mothers in families, they carry their family. And you can imagine that if the father or the mother has this responsibility for the family and be diagnosed with a disease, you can imagine how it can change everything and increase the worries. But we have resources in our communities. First of all, I want to mention briefly the diabetes self-management education. And I was talking to Dr. Gupta or Caitlin about the fear that some of our patients don't want to go to the dietitian because they're told, they feel they're going to be told not to eat. My approach is this: your lifestyle change, it should not be restrictive. It should not be prescriptive. It should be flexible. Okay. Going forward, ask yourself, first of all, what do you want to do? Set yourself your goal. Whatever works best for you will not be the one works best for the next person or another member of the family. Set your goal. Be realistic in achieving that goal. Do not want to lose 20 pounds a month. No, it won't happen. It is impossible. You're going to hurt yourself. However, if you lose 1 pound a month, but whatever you're doing is consistent, is healthy, believe me, you will achieve it. Okay. So it is very important. Set your goal as a realistic goal. Second, you ask yourself, what I'm doing, which one first? Like I take the approach of a smoker. If you have a smoker and you want them to stop smoking, you're not going to ask them to take out the time that is really critical for their smoking because it's going to be very frustrating. So ask yourself, among my behavior, what will be the easiest for me to take out first? Give yourself some time to acclimate. So basically, you will choose whatever behavior that you can really modulate, remove, or reduce. And then give yourself some encouragement every day. Yes, you won't probably do everything the same time as earlier. Yes, you won't. But with time, you will be disciplined enough to achieve it. Now, my training is in nutrition. And I know food is a very important cultural. If you go to Louisiana, they have a particular dish. If you go to Pennsylvania, they have a particular dish. If you go to Tennessee, they have a particular dish. So I know culture. If you see a culture, a given culture, that the way they dress can be one that really defines the culture. But also, more important is the meat, how it is cooked, the ingredient. We overlook that particular thing. That's the reason why most of our patients don't want to go to the dietitian, because the food they love, they grew up with, they're going to be asked, or they fear to be asked not to eat that anymore. No, you still can enjoy your meal. However, and this is however, if you want to eat salad, for example, green salad with your chicken, and you're going to eat a dressing, be less on the dressing. Cook your chicken different so you can bring the juice into your salad, for example, so you don't need that much dressing. It is just a simple tweak that you can make to your meal. Okay. The other thing that I would like to share in terms of your dietary behavior, and this is really based on experience from patients or communities I work with. Nobody should impose you what to eat, but rather guide you into the decision making. How many of you have had breakfast coming this morning here? How many of you have had breakfast? Okay. Some of you didn't have breakfast. Why? Time. Okay. Or you probably didn't plan that you're going to probably leave early, which I understand. So breakfast is important. Lunch is important. Dinner is important. How much you eat and what you eat is up to you. But you can start by having a structured meal, for example, in a given day. You can even include snack between, knowing that probably your lunch is going to be pushed on the side, or your dinner probably will come early, what have you. You can really modulate that to achieve your goal. The other thing I would like to mention is the cooking process. I see a lot of women here, and I'm sure that most of you probably cook at home, right? It is the best way to control what you eat. Yes, we all go to a restaurant from time to time, but it's the best way to control what you eat because you know what you put it in, okay, and how you cook it and how much you're going to serve yourself. One of the challenges that I usually have, when I ask the question to the patient, how many of you go out for a buffet? This is the problem with a buffet, is that you're going to pay for the buffet. So you want to really make your money worth, right? You probably need to eat that much, but because you pay for it, you want to eat. And the buffet is tricky because you can take it home. While if you order a meal, you can take the rest home. So those are really ideas you can really work about. So coming back to, you can manage your diabetes, it is manageable. We don't have to keep having those high number of mortality complication in our community. We don't have to. It is just a matter of really having the tool, trying to really make the decision to really improve your lifestyle, and then step by step achieve your goal. Like I mentioned again, diabetes is a complex disease, but the battle is not lost. Thank you.
Good morning. My question is about the mobile device. So I've gotten addicted to just playing games on it. And so I do it passively. So how do you slowly stop doing it?
And what phone do you use?
Laptop. I'm old.
So,
I play it on my laptop.
oh, so is it an app?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to delete the app.
Simple
but
yet so hard.
Simple answer. But but before you delete the app, there is something else that you need to do. You have to reflect on your life as a child and think of an activity that you wish you had time for, a hobby that you wish you had time for. So, the time that you will save by not being on the gaming app, that's the time you're going to devote to that activity or that hobby. So that, you know why you need to do that? Because when you don't play the game, you're going to feel deprived. We don't want you to feel deprived. You've got to replace that pleasure of the gaming with the joy of the activity, the hobby. There's a difference between pleasure and joy. So the pleasure is short term, the joy is long term. Go ahead. You need to read again, and not read on Kindle, not read on devices, but a real paper book.
There's
Get
a
it,
library
get it from
right
a
over there.
library. We are right now here. We are in a library.
Hi, question is for Dr. Warren Wareham. I'm sorry.
You can call me whatever you want, lady.
But you had mentioned that you could tell if a person had diabetes by the skin, and you had mentioned skin tags. What's the difference in skin tags and what we would consider as moles?
That's a good question, and that's why I think picture's worth 1,000 words. I don't have a great way to explain that difference. I think if I just showing 50 or 100 pictures of people that I believe have the acanthosis nigricans and the skin tags associated with it, I think you'd be able to be a good judge. Other than that, it is very difficult. Moles in general have no relation to insulin resistance. It is only that acanthosis nigricans that is associated with that, and it's really a matter of growth factor. The high insulin levels get mistaken. They hit an incorrect receptor, which is called the insulin-like growth factor receptor, and it just causes the skin to expand and the skin tags to grow. So I think I don't have a good way of distinguishing for you here on the stage the difference between a mole and a skin tag, but I think it's kind of like what one of the senators said about pornography: when you know it, you'll see it, or when you see it, you'll know it, rather. But by the way, I want to clarify that skin change does not necessarily mean diabetes. It just means insulin resistance, which is a risk factor for diabetes. So I don't want you to walk around telling people you've got diabetes.
I believe this is another question for you. Are you automatically tested for diabetes during your yearly or annual physical exam?
I would say almost certainly in most cases that is true. However, insurance is a very strange animal. I have ordered a hemoglobin A1C test in people who are overweight or obese, and it has been denied by insurance because their insurance company does not cover anything related to obesity, which just seems to me like you don't want to know whether the patient that you're going to be covering has a lifelong chronic disease. You're not interested in that information. It seems illogical to me. But I would say 95% of the time, you're going to either get a blood sugar or possibly a hemoglobin A1C, but almost certainly most everyone gets a blood sugar if they draw your blood for a routine exam. Would you agree with that?
In pediatrics, I'm not sure. I do not think it's a part of the routine annual exam unless there is a concern about excessive thirst, excessive weight loss, and excessive hunger. It's not generally a part in pediatrics, but then I'm not sure about the adults.
We don't like to draw blood from children if we don't have to, or stick their finger. So I think it's a lot different in your world than in mine.
Would you recommend that people ask for it during their annuals?
Definitely, especially if you're one of those high risk groups, which we talked about, and which was also just talked about a minute ago in great detail. If you struggle with weight, if you have a family history, if you've had gestational diabetes, if you're older, there's so many potential. If you were more if you have given birth to a child over 9 pounds, that actually puts you at risk for having diabetes because you may have had undiagnosed gestational diabetes, which is another risk factor.
Dr. Coe.
Yes, I just want to add a quick thing. The CDC recently have an initiative with different health department in different states. And for example, at Meharry, we have a service contract where we're going to incorporate that in a clinical care where patients that already have 1 or 2 criteria we already be automatically screened for diabetes or pre-diabetes.
We had more. So, for anyone who would like to take this, probably Dr. Okoye, what sugar substitutes are safe to consume?
I think you're going to probably get mad at me today. Only because some of the substitute, if you look at data in Europe and data in United States, the outcome is sometimes different. In Europe, for example, if any data suggests something in terms of negative health outcome, it will be banned. Here, we do probably accept it with some data that say, okay, you're going to have probably eat a ton of them, and later on probably try to modulate. If I may add, for example, the case of margarine, okay, we went from butter in the past to margarine because we were concerned about cholesterol, but later on we realized that margarine is even a killer because they have those trans fatty acids that increase your risk for heart disease more than we anticipated earlier. So right now, margarine is having trans fatty acids is banned. Okay, in food is banned. It has been banned 5 years ago. So my point is that those substitutes really depend. We have right now those artificial sweeteners that people have on the market, and the challenge for me, and this is really probably a personal note, is that because of the manufacturer, it really took effect in all our food, drink, or what have you. People we say no sugar added, but if you read the label carefully, they have artificial sweetener because if you don't have sugar, why is so sweet? But you have those artificials that are on the market. If you were to choose those, be mindful that the study have shown the studies that for which they used to convince the FDA that they can market to the population is that there's an amount that is not on the can or whatever. So be mindful of limiting the intake of those. We have sweetened bird in our mouth, and usually those artificial sweeteners are extremely sweet compared to your regular table sugar. So if you really get accustomed to that, if you want tomorrow to remove yourself from consuming sugar, is going to be very challenging because you are get yourself used to that sweetened taste. So those components really should be in your mind when you decide whether you want to go to those artificial alternative sweet beverages or food or whatever.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm going to make one comment about food, and Dr. Okoye could take me to school on this, I'm sure, but just like social media apps are designed to get you addicted, the food industry is trying to get you addicted to food. And there are three major addictions. Dr. Gupta mentioned them. She mentioned one more than I usually use, but basically sugar, salt, and fat. And those are the three things, and they will do anything to get them into your body. Those are the three addictions that they use. And they trick you by saying, oh, here's a box of cookies that is completely fat-free. But if you look at the carbohydrate content, it's absurd. And you will be, morbidly obese by noon tomorrow if you eat that entire box. And I don't know if you all are like me. I used to think that having cereal in the morning was a reasonable choice. And I would have cereal every day. In fact, I thought I was being really healthy because what's the least attractive cereal you could imagine that would not be like Count Chocula? And that would be Special K. So I'm eating Special K while wearing a glucose sensor, and my sugar went higher than anything else I ate that day. And what is the number 2 ingredient in Special K? Sugar. They are out to get you. If it says that it's sugar-free, fat-free, or even reduced sugar, they only have to reduce it by 10% to make a claim that it is reduced sugar or reduced fat or reduced. That's nothing. That's like saying, I'm going to, instead of dropping 10 bombs on you, I'm only going to drop 9. You'll be fine. No, it's not going to work. So I just want you to be aware the industry is out to get you to eat their food.
I do believe what it's Salt, Sugar, Fat, or Fat, Sugar, Salt, the really good book specifically talking about that topic.
You mean somebody already wrote it?
What?
This question is for any of the three of you. I noticed that you didn't mention anything about alcohol intake, and I believe in balance and moderation, including with alcohol. But my question specifically is, you hear about red wine and how it's good for women, good for men, 1 or 2 glasses a day. What are your thoughts on specifically red wine, but alcohol intake for prediabetes and for patients that have already been diagnosed with diabetes?
You.
I thought it was you, so I said I can add that. Okay, so I'm going to have you keep in mind two people, okay? One that don't have diabetes and one that has diabetes. As a diabetes, as someone with diabetes, your Zoom is fat and sugar. And people really usually they see fat as abstract, but fat convert to carbohydrate. I mean, convert to glucose or triglyceride or what have you, and then it can impact your health. So think about those two people. As someone who has diabetes, the alcohol can be done in moderation, but keep in mind that it's really your content of carbohydrate you're getting from that. And also, alcohol can make you low. That means it can drop your sugar level down if really you don't have any food in your stomach. The people who don't have diabetes, really, they can probably have more room, I should say, to really enjoy the alcohol beverages. But again, as a type 2 diabetes, and someone who have type 2 diabetes, you can enjoy it, but be mindful that at the end of the day, it is your sugar spike that you want to really keep in mind. Okay? And by all the time, if you are sick, if you think you didn't have any meal, do not even go there, because then it can make your blood sugar really go to where you don't want to. Okay.
I would like to hear Dr. Gupta's take on how alcohol might lower my short-term gratification in terms of what I want to do with food that evening.
It's
And just so you know, everything in moderation, there's only a small amount of alcohol in here.
it's a matter of what mode of pleasure you are using. And so if what is displacing what? Getting pleasure from alcohol versus getting pleasure from social media? In moderation, neither is bad. But when do we need to draw the line? That's what we need to decide. And that's different for everybody. Where do we all need to draw our own lines, our own boundaries? We have to decide that for ourselves, whether it comes to alcohol, whether it comes to social media and internet in general, and gaming apps.
And then specifically, I'll answer your comment about red wine. Red wine does have some health benefits associated in terms of raising HDL cholesterol, and again, in moderation. It also depends on which wine you choose. Some wines are much sweeter than others, even in red, but white wine tends to have more sugar in general. It depends on your taste, right? There's some red wines that are very sweet and others that are not. They have more tannic acid and therefore don't taste as sweet and aren't as sweet. But it does have some recorded health benefits. In fact, there's even a movement, I'm not very up on this, where they have isolated the active ingredient in red wine that they feel is supposed to be the most beneficial, and they're selling that in pills. I think I'd much rather have a glass of red wine, but again, I think the biggest problem is that people tend to eat more when they drink. And that's my point that I wanted to, that's why I turned over to Dr. Gupta. Our desire for, short-term gratification increases when we tend to relax and feel good. It's like, I'll have it tonight. I'll go to the gym tomorrow. Yeah, not when you're hungover, you won't.
So another question about labs. How often should A1C tests and glucose lab tests be done? Once a year, twice a year? What frequency?
Okay.
So the A1C typically, as Dr. Grace said, usually it is your average. The doctor want to see within the 3-month period how you were doing with your treatment or how your blood sugar level was, because the A1C is usually attached to your red blood cell, and your red blood cell have a cycle of about almost 3 months. Okay. Now it depends if you are controlled. Usually that we have a six every 6 months, twice a year, once a year, depend. But someone who's really not on the doesn't control the diabetes, it really has those high level from very often. Then the A1C will be done within 3-month period. Usually I don't. Well, on the research side point, I don't usually do any A1C before a 3 months time, unless there's a treatment that really just started and I want to see the impact quickly. But typically it is 3 months or every 6 months or once a year, depending on how controlled the patient is with the treatment. Okay. When it comes to treatment, one thing that I would like to note is that sometimes at home when we take the medicine, because of the side effect, we don't want to take it as prescribed, or we have delay or we forget. One of the key things, and the doctor can testify to that when you go back to your doctor and there are not probably be any change, tell them what you did, because of what they will assume the treatment is not working. They either will increase the dose or change the medication. So be very open with your provider, your doctor, as to how you have really, be taking your medication if it were not consistent or any side effect you had.
I'll make a brief comment on that. I think it really depends on what group you're talking about. If you're talking about screening, we generally don't always use the A1C. Sometimes a fasting blood sugar is what insurance will always pay for. And somebody who didn't have any risk factors, the 20-year-old, just got out of or is in college, they don't need an A1C every year, especially if they're a low risk group and they don't have other biological risk factors in terms of weight. But if you have risk factors, you should probably have an A1C once a year to screen for diabetes. So those are two screening answers. And then the last category would be if you have diabetes and you're on insulin, you have to then get an A1C at least every 3 months. I would say every 3 months, not at least, but and rarely we will go to maybe every 6 months if they're wonderfully controlled. And then type 2 diabetes, it really depends on what medication you're on and whether or not you how well controlled you are as to whether we would do it every 3 or every 6. But in general, I would say if you have diabetes, every 6 would be the minimum that I would do an A1C.
Okay, quick question, sorry. So signs of the insulin resistance, you say skin tags. What about cherry angiomas? Are those classified as skin tags?
If so, I'm a goner.
Okay.
No, I don't. There's no association that I'm aware of with the little cherry dots that some people have on their skin and sometimes don't know what they are. But it just looks like somebody took a little red magic marker and went doot. And we all sometimes have a few of those, but they have no connection to blood sugar that I know of, Dr. Gupta.
So, Dr. Gupta, I have a question for you. You talked about the importance of sleep and how it affects cortisol levels. Can you talk just a little bit more about how cortisol affects insulin as well?
So if we are not well rested, the next day our body probably, these are all hypotheses, probably perceives that as a stressful state. Cortisol is a hormone that is made by adrenal glands. Adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys. Cortisol is our stress hormone. It helps us deal with stress, physical stress, mental stress. When we are sick, our body needs to make a lot of cortisol to help us get over that sickness. Cortisol can cause insulin resistance. Cortisol helps maintain normal blood sugars. If we are not making enough cortisol, our blood sugar will be low. That's how cortisol deficiency is diagnosed. Low blood pressure, low blood sugar, not able to recover quickly from illnesses. So not having a good night's sleep next day puts our body into a stressful state. which then increases the production of cortisol, which can then make us a little bit more hungry and not give us enough energy for exercise as well. So less energy for exercise and eating more combined together could lead to obesity.
Hello, I have a question for like anybody who can answer. So my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and because of the chemo and steroids she had to take, she became pre-diabetic. So I was wondering what like if she should continue to take metformin, which is like the medication she takes because of it, she should continue to take that. And her like that pre-diabetic like level is like 5.9%. So I just wanted to know if she should continue taking that medication or not.
Can I just clarify the question? I didn't hear all of it. On medication, and then did you say she's taking metformin?
Yeah,
And-
should she continue taking that if she's like active and eating healthy?
Okay. And the A1C was 5.9%. Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure. So the question is, one, it makes a great point that medications and the stress of illness, particularly something as bad as a cancer, and sometimes those patients are given high dose steroids either with or as part of their chemo, that can raise blood sugar. 5.9 is a very good number. Metformin has a rare but real side effect of sometimes loose bowel movements or diarrhea, and if that was an issue, I would definitely jettison the metformin because 5.9, you're going to get an A plus in my book. Cancer is your number one worry at this point, and 5.9 is a very good number. If you have diabetes, you're doing extremely well. It's possible the metformin could take a vacation and see if the A1C stays low, if it's giving side effects. If it's not giving side effects, metformin has some wonderful associations with perhaps even lower dementia, not proven, but associated. Lower cancer, not proven, but associated. In fact, there was decreased mortality in a trial of people with metastatic cancer who were taking metformin. So metformin has some wonderful associations with it, not proven, but I have no problem with continuing metformin in the situation you described, as long as it's tolerated.
All right. So, Dr. Okoye, I have a question for you. You talked about the financial burden of diabetes, and I can personally attest to that. So, I'm very interested in what are some resources that people can use if they are having a hard time affording their medications, prescriptions, or even just doctor visits?
So I think the reason why I got the data from GoodRx, because a lot of people use GoodRx as a way to really make the medication cost less. Right. So we know diabetes has a lot of costs added to it. In some clinic, and I'm not a clinician, I'm not a manager in the clinic. So, but in some clinics they have those scale, pay scale. Also Publix, I worked with Publix what few years back. They have, I don't know if they still have it, but there were times when they will give metformin worth of a 3-month prescription or supply for free. They also give some antibiotic for free. So usually some of the pharmacies really can really have those support program for the communities that can be explored. But in some clinic also they have either information that where patient can really get those discounts to really lessen the cost for the medication.
So, really kind of being your own advocate and asking for help and asking for what programs there might be out there.
Be really out. When you go to the pharmacy, one of the things I have a problem with the pharmacy, when you go to the pharmacy, the HIPAA, for me, the HIPAA is not very well applied. If you go to the pharmacy, you want to fill your prescription, someone is driving by the window to get the medication, you can hear everything they're saying. Also, in the pharmacy, when you go and you pick up your medication, there's a counseling tag that you can get counseling. But our survey have shown that people don't reach out to those resources because it is so open that they feel that when they talk, people can hear them. But besides that, talk to your pharmacist. They may have a way where there's a discount. When you don't ask, you won't know. So always be proactive. Just ask. It may not be there, but at least I will direct you somewhere else.
either person can answer this question. I'm a little bit confused. From time to time, when you hear what are good A1C numbers and what are good glucose numbers, what are the averages we're trying to reach as a diabetic? Now, I've heard 100 for A1C and then 120. Uh, what are the best numbers for A1C and glucose numbers for daily testing?
Probably go down the line on this. I think we probably all have similar answers, though. Depends whether we're talking about fasting blood sugars. A normal fasting blood sugar is considered under 100. If you're up to 110, that's called mild impaired fasting glucose. And if you're over 126, that's considered diabetes. So that's diagnostic criteria. If you already know that you have diabetes, a lot of where we want your blood sugars depends on how risky it is for you to have a low blood sugar. We had a question just before about a patient with cancer. I don't want a patient who's already struggling with appetite and nausea and other struggles to have any low blood sugars. And so if they have diabetes, I might raise my target to be, let's say just 120 to 180 would be fine to make sure they don't have a low blood sugar, especially if they're on insulin. If you're on insulin, we have to be much more careful. So the answer is going to vary depending on the patient. As far as A1C, if you're under 5.9, you don't have diabetes. That's a wonderful number. You get an A plus. If you're between 5.9 and 6.5, that's in the pre-diabetes range. But if you get there from having been diagnosed with diabetes and now you're only in the pre-diabetes range, your risk of complications is not much different from the general population. It's somewhat different, but it's not much different. So really, it's only when your A1C is over 6.5 or 7 that we start to see an increase in complications. And each drop of 2 percentage points cuts your risk in half. But once you get down to 7, going below 7 really doesn't have a significant impact on long-term complications. And if you go too far, you can cause hypoglycemia, which I will list as one of the most lethal complications of insulin therapy in patients with diabetes. And you have to be very careful about your range and your target when someone is on insulin, particularly children. And I think Dr. Gupta is already gearing up to give us a lecture on that.
So in children, the guidelines suggest for type 2 diabetics to keep hemoglobin A1C less than 7%, and for type 1 diabetics, less than 7.5%. Now, for my type 1 diabetic patients who are really young, 3 to 4 or even 5 years of age, do I always aim for less than 7.5? Probably not, because I would be increasing their risk for hypoglycemia. I always tell families I worry about hyperglycemia or high blood sugars, but I worry more about hypoglycemia. So there has to be a balance between being motivated to get to the guideline A1C versus the risk of hypoglycemia. So there is no standard number that fits all children or all adults. It's very personalized, very individualized, which hemoglobin A1C works for whom. Of course, 12% or 14% hemoglobin A1C doesn't work for anybody, but between the ranges of 7 to 8% A1C, that's negotiable.
I would like to add one quick thing. So basically, everybody that have type 2 diabetes, you have to ask your doctor, where is my goal? Because at home, you check your blood sugar probably before a meal, after a meal, or before you take your insulin unit or what have you. Ask them what is your goal and work towards that goal. Like Dr. Great said, the target depends on each patient, depend on what other disease you have. Not because you want to reach 6.5 that is good for you necessarily. The doctor may say, okay, 7.5 is good for you because of the other health issue you have. So knowing your goal first that you have really asked your doctor about will make you walk toward that goal. Okay.
I always tell my patients that a high blood sugar will take 30 years to kill you, but a low blood sugar can kill you within hours, and you have to balance that. And if you're on insulin, and that's really who I'm speaking to here, almost most other drugs will not put you at significant risk for that. Insulin is the number one drug. If you're on insulin, that sentence is probably one of the most important sentences we say to our patients.
That has been burned into my brain. Absolutely. All right, we have time for one more question.
Hello. I've heard some great benefits of fasting. I just want to know your views on intermittent fasting.
What? Oh, intermittent fasting. Oh, okay. So you're going to the nutrition. Okay. You know, today we have a lot of method approaches that are really there that people claim they use and they're successful. What is your goal? Mm-hmm.
My goal is for to be healthy and weight loss.
Okay. So weight loss, so your intermittent fasting, you want to really use it to manage your weight.
Yeah. Yes, and also to I was pre-diabetic at one time, so I started the intermittent fasting that helped me get off that range. So
Okay. I'm going to really mention this. Fasting depends on what you call fasting. People can say, okay, 8 hours without eating is fasting for me. 6 hours is fasting for me, depending. I'm not a good advocate of you going without eating for a while. Because when you don't eat, your liver will bring sugar into your bloodstream. Okay. So until probably you don't have it, and then you go to your fat, you're going to break your fat, and then you're going to probably be at risk of ketosis. So those fasting really, I will be very cautious. Discuss with your provider or your healthcare team about what really would be best for you. If you have been diagnosed with diabetes or have pre-diabetes, and you want to do those approaches to really reach a weight goal, do not do it on your own. Just seek your provider input. That's what I can say.
I'll add to that. I don't know whether Dr. Gupta would recommend it for children very often, but for adults, I'll let you cover that in a second. But for adults, there's a wonderful article, just I think a couple of years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is probably one of the most authoritative journals I read, about all the incredible benefits of intermittent fasting. And if we look back to our ancient ancestors growing up in a hunter-gatherer society, I mean, intermittent fasting was basically how our bodies evolved to handle that. We know how to store calories. We know how to bring them back when we need them. That's how our bodies generally worked. Store them for a long time and then pull them out when we need them. And intermittent fasting is a direct mimic of that. And there are tremendous benefits that have been listed, including one of the most popularized benefits, and that is that it tends to help people with weight loss. I have no negatives to tell you unless you are on insulin. And then you are potentially playing with fire because you have to be a really, really good sharpshooter of your glucose control to not get into trouble if you're doing intermittent fasting, particularly if you're on long-acting insulin. You want to comment on this on kids and teenagers?
Intermittent fasting or ketogenic diet is generally not recommended for children who are still growing. Once they are done with their growth, development, and puberty, then of course, on an individual basis, they can talk to their pediatrician if that is something that might be helpful for them for weight loss. But until they are done growing, they need the carbohydrates. They are the building blocks for growth. So a well-balanced diet for a teenager or for a child typically contains about 50% of their calories to be coming from carbohydrates, and the remaining 50% is divided equally between protein and fat. So 25% calories from protein and 25% from fat. That provides a really good environment for the growth, development, and puberty of children. So I wouldn't encourage intermittent fasting or ketogenic diet for children unless there is a specific condition. Ketogenic diet is used for treatment of epilepsy in some children. That's a completely different situation, but not on a routine basis.
And one last thing, pregnant women should not do that either. Just that would not be good for pregnancy. Ketones are bad for pregnancy.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Really appreciate the engagements. If you do have further questions, if you could write them down on the index card, we'll be able to gather them up and hopefully be able to answer them at a different time. Dr. Wiram, Dr. Gupta, and Dr. Akoi, thank you so incredibly much for this afternoon. This was wonderful. The information that you provided really was impactful, and I think a lot of people here are going to have quite a few takeaways. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Ria Kennard, founder of the Dorothy Marie Kennard Foundation, and thank you for joining us today. I hope the information shared will help you make life-changing decisions that will improve your life for years to come. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.